You're trespassing. Step away from community property. That's what the HOA Karen told me, while standing on the ranch my family has owned since 1952. I'd just returned from an 18-month Army deployment. Dust still on my boots. Duffel bag in the back of my pickup. I pull up to the gate of my family's 200-acre ranch, and a spotless white Mercedes is blocking the entrance. She's already on the phone with 911. "Officer, there's a man refusing to leave our property." Sirens started echoing down the valley. I walked toward her holding the original deed my grandfather filed decades before her entire subdivision even existed. She kept smiling, confident, certain I was about to be arrested. She had no idea that one phone call would trigger a legal battle that would destroy everything she'd built. "What would you do if strangers tried to steal your family's ranch? Where are you watching from?" Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. Stone Creek Ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, tough old bird named Frank Stone, homesteaded this land back in 1952 with nothing but grit and a handshake deal with the county. 200 acres of prime Texas hill country, rolling pastures, original growth timber, and a natural creek that runs clear and cold year-round. I'm 3rd-generation Army Corps of Engineers trained in infrastructure, water rights, and land surveying. The military taught me precision, documentation, and how to think 3 steps ahead, skills that were about to come in real handy. The ranch isn't just pretty scenery. We run cattle, host the county fair every summer, and my workshop has pulled more neighbors out of mechanical trouble than I can count. When Mrs. Rodriguez's tractor broke down during harvest, guess who spent his weekend fixing it for free? When the Hendersons needed hay after that drought in 2019, guess whose barn doors stayed open? But 3 years ago, everything started changing. Bradley Whitfield's development company built Meadowbrook Estates, this luxury subdivision right next to our property line. Big houses, manicured lawns, and HOA rules thicker than a phone book. The houses sold fast to city folks wanting that country lifestyle without any actual country responsibilities. Karen Whitfield, Bradley's wife, made herself HOA president before the paint dried on the first house. 45 years old, former pharmaceutical sales rep, drives that white Mercedes like it's a weapon. She's got this way of using words like community standards and property values that makes your skin crawl. The trouble started small. Karen would drive by our fence line taking pictures. Then came the complaints to the county about our unsightly agricultural operations. The smell of fresh hay and leather in the barn mixing with that chemical odor from new construction told the whole story. Old Texas bumping up against suburban entitlement. When I got back from deployment last month, I found HOA violation notices taped to my front door. $500 a day in fines for unauthorized livestock operations in a residential zone. My cattle, Roosevelt the bull and his ladies, were apparently violating someone's aesthetic sensibilities. Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her heart, filled me in over coffee. "That HOA woman's been here 3 times, mijo, measuring things, taking pictures, asking questions about your water rights." The rough wooden gatepost where Grandpa carved Stone Creek 1952 had fresh scratches around it, like someone had been trying to remove his handiwork. But Karen's opening move was pure genius, in an evil mastermind kind of way. She'd hired a surveyor to re-establish proper boundary lines and filed a complaint claiming our ranch access road fell under HOA jurisdiction, the same road Grandpa built in 1952, maintained by the county for 70 years. 2 days after I got home, Karen rolled up with some lawyer in a shiny BMW, got out like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, demanding we remove all livestock within 48 hours or face significant legal consequences. I stood there in my work jeans and boots, looking at this woman in her business suit telling me to get rid of cattle that had been grazing this land since before she was born. Roosevelt, my prize bull, chose that exact moment to lumber over to the fence and stare at her Mercedes like it had personally offended him. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, "this ranch has been operating under agricultural exemption since 1952. We're grandfathered under county zoning." Karen's smile got sharper. "Not according to our community attorney. This entire area is now residential. Your little hobby farm is bringing down property values for legitimate homeowners." Hobby farm. 70 years of Stone family sweat and sacrifice, and she called it a hobby farm. As they drove away, kicking up dust with their fancy cars, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Karen had just declared war on the wrong veteran. Karen didn't waste time escalating. Within a week, she'd filed formal complaints with the county claiming our ranch violated residential zoning laws. Then she hired her own surveyor, some guy in pressed khakis who'd never seen a day of honest work, to re-establish proper boundaries. But here's where Karen's city girl ignorance started showing. She spread rumors at the country club that our ranch was an unsanitary health hazard, apparently not realizing that half the country club members buy their beef from ranches just like ours. The rumor mill works both ways in small towns, and word got back to me fast. The real kicker? Karen sent certified letters to all our neighbors encouraging them to file noise complaints about cattle operations that had been running peacefully for decades. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me a copy, shaking her head. "This woman's got more nerve than a toothache," she said, which in Texas means you've really crossed a line. Now, the Army taught me that when someone attacks, you don't just defend, you gather intelligence. So I spent 3 days at the county courthouse digging through property records like I was searching for IEDs in Iraq. And boy, did I find some buried treasure. Turns out Meadowbrook Estates was built using something called overlay zoning. Sounds fancy, but here's what it really means. The county let Bradley build his subdivision while acknowledging that existing properties kept their original zoning rights. Our ranch maintained its agricultural exemption, grandfathered from 1952. Karen's neighborhood was basically built around us, not over us. But the real bombshell was in the original county planning meeting minutes from 2019. Bradley Whitfield himself argued that keeping the ranch would add rustic charm and authentic character to the community. He literally used our ranch as a selling point to buyers, then sent his wife to harass us out of existence. I called Nolan McCarthy, our family attorney and a guy who's been fighting property battles since before Karen was born. Retired county prosecutor, knows where all the legal bodies are buried. When I showed him the documents, he started grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Son," he said, "you've got them dead to rights, but let's do this properly." We ordered a new professional survey using the original 1952 boundary markers. Iron pins Grandpa drove himself, still there after 70 years. The results were beautiful. Not only was our agricultural exemption rock solid, but Karen's precious community entrance with its fancy stone pillars and HOA signs was built 15 feet onto our property. 15 feet of illegal trespass, decorated with their own violation notices. I filed the trespass notice on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Karen showed up with a county inspector demanding an immediate cattle inspection. She had this satisfied look, like she was about to spring some trap. "Ma'am," the inspector said, looking confused as he reviewed our paperwork, "this ranch has been here longer than the county zoning office. Everything's in perfect order." Karen's face went through about 6 different shades of red. "That's impossible. Our attorney said—" "Your attorney was misinformed," the inspector cut her off. "Agricultural exemptions don't expire just because someone builds houses nearby." That's when Karen made her first real mistake. Instead of backing down gracefully, she got personal. "I don't care what some dusty old papers say. I won't have this neighborhood turned into some backwoods cattle operation. I'll make his life miserable until he sells." The inspector actually took a step back. Threatening harassment in front of a county official? That's admitting to a crime. But my favorite part of this whole mess was Roosevelt's reaction to Karen's car horn. Every morning, she'd drive by and honk, trying to spook the cattle, I guess. But Roosevelt, being a bull with opinions, would position himself right at the fence line and just stare at her Mercedes. Not aggressive, just judgmental. The neighbors started bringing coffee to watch the daily staring contest. Mrs. Rodriguez called it better than cable TV. Here's something most people don't know about property law. Agricultural exemptions don't just protect your right to farm, they actually give you special legal standing against harassment. When someone tries to force you off agricultural land using residential zoning rules, they're essentially attempting theft of protected property rights. The takeaway? Never assume new zoning laws override old property rights. Grandfathered protections often trump local ordinances. As Karen drove away that day, spinning her wheels and throwing gravel, I knew she was going to escalate again. The morning mist was rising from the creek, carrying that clean smell of wild mint and fresh water. It reminded me why 3 generations of Stones had fought to keep this place. Karen wanted a war? She was about to get one. Karen's next move proved she'd learned absolutely nothing from round 1. 2 weeks later, the HOA voted to improve community drainage by redirecting our natural creek flow. Their excuse? Ranch runoff was creating mosquito breeding hazards that threatened their children's safety. Pure garbage, but clever garbage. Karen had done her homework on environmental regulations and found a bureaucratic angle to attack us. She hired contractors to dig a diversion channel on HOA property, claiming it was preventive flood control. The sound of heavy machinery digging at dawn told me everything I needed to know about Karen's respect for neighborly courtesy. Diesel fuel mixed with disturbed earth, creating that sharp industrial smell that doesn't belong in ranch country. But Karen wasn't done. She filed a complaint with the state environmental agency claiming our cattle were polluting the waterway. Then came the social media campaign, Ring doorbell footage edited to make our gentle cattle look like rampaging buffalo, posted with captions like, "Protect our children from agricultural runoff." Here's where my Corps of Engineers training came in handy. I know water rights law better than most lawyers, and Karen had just walked into quicksand. That creek has been running through stone property since before Texas was a state. Our homestead deed from 1952 includes something called riparian rights, legal protections for landowners adjacent to waterways. These rights don't disappear when someone builds houses downstream. More importantly, any creek diversion that affects water flow to existing users requires consent from all riparian rights holders. Karen's contractors were literally violating federal environmental law, one shovelful at a time. I spent a weekend documenting the natural watershed using mapping techniques the Army taught me for combat engineering projects. Took water quality samples upstream and downstream of our ranch. Guess what? Our water was cleaner than what was flowing out of the subdivision, where lawn fertilizer and storm drain runoff were the real pollution sources. Then I made some calls. The Texas Water Development Board doesn't mess around with unauthorized creek modifications. When I explained that an HOA was attempting to divert natural water flow without permits, their enforcement division got very interested very quickly. The environmental impact study they required revealed something beautiful. Karen's planned diversion would actually flood 3 houses during spring rains. The engineering was so bad it threatened the very neighborhood she claimed to protect. Now here's a knowledge nugget that saved my ranch. Riparian rights are some of the strongest property protections in American law. They often supersede local zoning because water law predates most municipal regulations. The simple rule: water rights run with the land, not with zoning changes. 3 days after I filed my complaint with the state, Karen received a cease and desist order. $10,000 per day in fines until the diversion was filled in and the creek restored. I was standing in my workshop when she got the news, and I swear I heard her scream from half a mile away. But the real victory came when the state water inspector showed up. Professional guy, been doing environmental assessments for 20 years. He took one look at our operation and started asking about our conservation practices. "You folks are doing everything right," he said, watching our cattle drink from the creek under the shade of 70-year-old oak trees. "This is how sustainable ranching is supposed to work." Roosevelt chose that moment to wade into the shallow water, cooling his massive bulk while dragonflies danced around his horns. Creek stones, worn smooth by decades of natural flow, clicked together under his hooves, a sound my grandfather had heard, that my father had heard, that I'd grown up with. The inspector wrote in his report that our ranch operation actually improved local water quality through natural filtration and erosion control. Meanwhile, the subdivision's storm drainage was introducing fertilizer runoff and road chemicals into the watershed. Karen's environmental complaint backfired so completely that the state recommended our ranch as a model for sustainable water management. They even suggested the subdivision adopt our conservation practices. But here's what really burned Karen up. The local newspaper picked up the story. Local ranch praised for environmental stewardship, while HOA faces fines for illegal creek modification. The article included a photo of Roosevelt drinking from the crystal-clear creek, looking like the king of the countryside. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me 3 copies of that newspaper, grinning ear to ear. "Mijijo," she said, "sometimes the good guys do win." The evening quiet was particularly sweet that day, broken only by natural sounds, cattle lowing softly, creek water flowing over stones, and the distant sound of contractors filling in Karen's illegal drainage ditch. Karen was about to learn that when you mess with Texas water rights, Texas water law messes back. Karen's third assault came through the city code enforcement office, and this time she'd brought backup. Multiple citations arrived in my mailbox like legal cluster bombs, unsafe barn structures, improper vehicle storage, fence height violations, and my personal favorite, operating an unlicensed auto repair business because I fixed neighbors' equipment in my workshop. The code enforcement officer was a guy named Dale Kruger, who showed up wearing pressed khakis and carrying a clipboard like it was a holy relic. Everything about him screamed, never worked with his hands. He measured fence heights with a tape measure, photographed every tool in my workshop, and documented tire wear patterns on my ranch truck like he was investigating a murder. But Dale's visit revealed something interesting. Every single violation referenced residential building codes, requirements that don't apply to agricultural structures. My workshop, built to house heavy equipment, was actually safer than most suburban garages. The barn, constructed with techniques my grandfather learned building Army Corps projects, could probably survive a tornado. Here's where Karen's city background betrayed her again. Agricultural structures are exempt from residential codes under state law. My buildings were built to agricultural standards, which are often stricter than residential requirements because they have to handle heavy machinery and livestock. While Dale was busy measuring things that didn't matter, Karen was spreading rumors about my military service. She'd somehow found records of a disciplinary action from my deployment. What she didn't mention was that I'd refused an illegal order to falsify engineering reports in a combat zone. The Army backed my decision, but Karen presented it as evidence of anger management issues and failure to follow civilian authority. The neighborhood social media went crazy. Posts warning about a dangerous individual with military weapons training living next to their children. Karen even claimed I'd threatened her with violence, which was news to me since our only interaction had been that first encounter at my gate. But here's the thing about military training. It teaches you to document everything. I had security camera footage of every encounter, recorded timestamps of every violation notice, and detailed logs of every harassment incident. When Karen's accusations reached the county sheriff, they asked for evidence. 20 minutes later, they were apologizing for wasting my time. Meanwhile, I was digging into Dale Kruger's background and found some fascinating connections. His consulting company had received a $5,000 payment from Whitfield Development just 2 months before my citations began. Municipal records showed Dale had used the same violation tactics against 3 other properties that Bradley wanted to acquire. The pattern was clear: identify problem properties, harass owners with frivolous code violations, force expensive legal battles until they sell below market value. But Dale made one crucial mistake. He demanded engineering certification for my barn roof, apparently not realizing that I am a licensed professional engineer. When I provided my own certification, he demanded an independent assessment. That's when I called in a favor. My buddy Marcus Schuyler was visiting on leave from the Army Corps, and he happened to be a structural engineer with federal licensing. Marcus took one look at my barn and started laughing. "Garrett, this building's over-engineered by about 200%. Whoever built it knew what they were doing." "My grandfather," I said, "learned construction building corps projects during the war. Marcus's official federal engineer certification trumped any local code enforcement authority." Dale's clipboard suddenly looked a lot less impressive when faced with actual expertise. Here's your knowledge nugget. Municipal code enforcement officers often don't understand the difference between residential and agricultural building standards. Agricultural structures are typically built stronger because they handle heavier loads and harsher conditions. The simple takeaway: know your zoning classification and what codes actually apply to your property. The community response was shifting too. Mrs. Rodriguez organized what she called coffee clatch intelligence networks. Basically, neighborhood ladies sharing information about Karen's tactics. Turns out, Karen had approached the feed store owner trying to get ranch suppliers to boycott me. She'd pressured our veterinarian to drop us as clients. She was systematically trying to strangle our operation economically, but small-town loyalty runs deeper than HOA threats. Doc Martinez, our vet, told Karen exactly where she could stick her demands. The feed store owner, Vietnam veteran who'd known my family for 40 years, suggested Karen might want to find a new place to buy her fancy lawn fertilizer. The morning smell of fresh coffee at these neighbor meetings, mixing with the old wood scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen, reminded me why rural communities stick together. We look after each other because out here, your neighbors aren't just people who live nearby. They're your lifeline when trouble comes calling. Karen was about to learn that attacking one ranch family meant taking on the entire community. 3 weeks into Karen's siege, I decided to dig deeper into our property history. Something wasn't adding up about how a subdivision got built so close to our boundaries without triggering easement disputes. So I drove to the state archives in Austin, requesting every document related to the original stone homestead. What I found changed everything. Grandpa's 1952 deed included a clause I'd never paid attention to: mineral rights, not just oil and gas, but gravel and stone quarrying rights to the entire property. Texas Hill Country is built on limestone, and quality building stone was valuable even back then. But the real bombshell was in the survey maps. The original Stone Creek Ranch included 25 acres that were never officially transferred to the county. Due to a clerical error in 1987, the county had sold land to Bradley's development company that they didn't actually own. Those missing 25 acres included the current HOA Community Center, the fancy entrance with its stone pillars, and half the subdivision's main road. Karen's HOA had built their entire common area infrastructure on land that still technically belonged to my family. I sat in that archive reading room surrounded by musty documents and the smell of old paper, trying to process what this meant. The county had sold property without clear title. Bradley's company had purchased land they couldn't legally obtain. And Karen's HOA had invested $800,000 in facilities on property they didn't own. Here's how title law works. You can't give what you don't have. When the county sold our 25 acres to Bradley using a quit-claim deed, they transferred only whatever ownership they actually possessed. Since they never legally obtained our land in the first place, Bradley got nothing. The technical term is defective title, and it invalidates every transaction that followed. Nolan McCarthy's reaction when I showed him the documents was priceless. This 70-year-old attorney actually jumped out of his chair and started pacing around his office like a prosecutor who'd just found the smoking gun. "Son," he said, "they're not just harassing you, they're living on stolen land." The financial implications were staggering. 25 acres of prime developed real estate worth approximately $2.4 million at current market rates. The HOA had unknowingly invested in improvements to property they'd never legally acquired. Their insurance policies were void because you can't insure property you don't own. More importantly, all of Karen's liens and violations against our ranch were legally meaningless. You can't encumber someone's property when you don't have legal standing to file complaints in the first place. But here's where it got really interesting. Texas law requires continuous property tax payments to maintain ownership claims. I drove straight to the county tax office and pulled records going back to 1952. Stone family had been paying taxes on all original acreage every single year, including the disputed 25 acres. The tax assessor, a woman who'd been there since dirt was invented, shook her head when she saw the documents. "Honey, this is the kind of mistake that keeps lawyers in business for generations. Your family never stopped owning that land. The county just forgot to tell anybody." This wasn't just a harassment case anymore. This was potentially systematic fraud involving a county government, a development company, and an HOA that had been illegally formed using defective property titles. I drove home thinking about irony. Karen had spent months trying to steal my ranch through legal harassment, never realizing she was living on land my family actually owned. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat had been coming from people with no legal authority to make them. Roosevelt was waiting at the gate when I got home, probably wondering why I looked like I'd swallowed the canary. "Big guy," I told him. "We just found our ace in the hole." The next morning, Nolan and I spread maps across my kitchen table like generals planning a campaign. Coffee brewing, legal documents everywhere, and the sweet smell of revenge in the air. "We've got two choices," Nolan explained. "Quiet title action to establish clear ownership, or nuclear option. Demand immediate removal of all HOA structures from your land." I chose option 3. Force a public hearing where every dirty trick would be exposed under oath, with media present. Karen wanted a fight? Let's give her one she'd never forget. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. File for quiet title action with the county, requesting a public hearing to resolve the boundary dispute. Force Karen's HOA to defend their legal standing while knowing they had none. Meanwhile, document every harassment incident until we had enough evidence to destroy them in court. But I wanted insurance, a physical demonstration that would make the property dispute impossible to ignore. Using my Corps of Engineers background, I designed controlled access barriers for the disputed entrance, temporary structures that looked permanent but could be removed quickly if needed. The barriers served dual purposes. They'd block HOA access during their next community meeting, and they'd force acknowledgement of the property dispute. When Karen called police, they'd have to investigate the underlying ownership question. Mrs. Rodriguez became our unofficial intelligence coordinator. Her kitchen turned into mission control, with neighborhood ladies providing real-time updates on HOA activities. The smell of fresh tortillas and strong coffee fueled our planning sessions. "That woman's been calling emergency HOA meetings," Mrs. Rodriguez reported, "talking about lawsuits and property condemnation." Perfect. Let Karen dig her hole deeper. Meanwhile, I was building our legal case systematically. Professional surveyor confirmed the boundary discrepancies using original 1952 iron markers. Environmental engineer documented that our ranch operations actually improved local water quality. 3 expert witnesses ready to testify about agricultural exemptions, water rights, and property law. But the most important piece was community support. I discovered that most HOA residents had no idea their property titles were defective. When I quietly approached 3 reasonable board members, they were horrified to learn about the legal problems. Here's something most people don't understand about HOA law. Boards have fiduciary responsibility to protect homeowner investments. When leadership pursues personal vendettas that threaten property values, they can be held personally liable for damages. The simple rule: HOA boards must act in community interest, not personal interest. Secret meetings in my workshop revealed that even some HOA members wanted Karen removed. Her extremist tactics were embarrassing the neighborhood and creating legal liability for everyone. They were ready to support reasonable resolution if it protected their home investments. I spent evenings teaching neighbors about property law basics, how to research deed records, understand zoning classifications, verify boundary lines. Knowledge is power. And an educated community couldn't be manipulated by Karen's legal theater. The media strategy was crucial. Local newspaper interested in "government error creates property rights conflict" angle. Frame the story as innocent homeowners caught in bureaucratic mistake, with me as problem solver rather than problem creator. Channel 12 News loved the David versus Goliath narrative. Veteran family ranch threatened by suburban HOA expansion. They scheduled coverage for the county hearing, guaranteeing public scrutiny of the proceedings. But the best part was psychological warfare. I studied Karen's pattern. She escalated when publicly challenged, always doubling down instead of backing down. The county hearing would give her rope to hang herself with. Technical preparations included GPS mapping of exact disputed boundaries, engineering assessments of all structures built on our land, and detailed financial analysis of damages caused by the harassment campaign. Legal documents were ready: proposed settlement agreement offering fair ground lease to HOA, revised property deeds establishing clear boundaries, and yes, countersuit papers if Karen wanted to keep fighting. Contingency plans covered every scenario. If Karen tried sabotage, criminal charges were ready to file. If Bradley attempted legal intimidation, we had evidence of systematic fraud. If the HOA tried emergency action, injunctions were prepared. The workshop became our war room, maps covering every wall surface, evidence organized in military precision. Late-night planning sessions with the smell of motor oil and legal briefs, probably the first time those 2 scents had mixed. 2 weeks before the hearing, I implemented the physical demonstration. Professional installation of temporary barriers blocking HOA entrance with clear signage, disputed property, legal resolution pending. Karen's reaction was predictable and perfect. Emergency police calls, threatened lawsuits, media interviews claiming illegal blockade of community property. Exactly what we wanted. Every outburst documented, every threat recorded, every illegal claim preserved for court testimony. The neighbors started calling it Operation Checkmate. Roosevelt seemed to approve. He'd taken to standing guard near the new barriers, like he understood we were finally fighting back. 3 days until the county hearing. Karen had no idea she was walking into a trap 70 years in the making. With the county hearing looming, Karen abandoned all pretense of legal harassment and went full scorched earth. Her desperation was showing, and desperate people make stupid mistakes. First came the social media blitz. Karen created fake profiles to flood neighborhood apps with posts about dangerous military extremist threatening community safety. Edited photos made our ranch look like an environmental disaster, cattle appearing malnourished, facilities seeming run down. The problem with fake social media campaigns? Digital forensics can trace everything. Same IP address, similar writing patterns, identical posting schedules. Karen might have been good at pharmaceutical sales, but she was terrible at cybercrime. Then she targeted our business relationships. Karen pressured the feed store to stop selling us supplies, claiming we were operating illegally and threatening to sue anyone who supported criminal activity. She convinced our veterinarian's office manager to cancel our service contracts, lying about court orders that didn't exist. But small-town loyalty runs deeper than suburban threats. Doc Martinez called me personally. "Garrett, some crazy woman's trying to tell me how to run my practice. Your cattle are the healthiest in the county, and she can take her threats somewhere else." The feed store owner, Vietnam veteran Charlie Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's husband, had an even better response. He posted Karen's demands on the store bulletin board under a sign reading, "Local busybodies for entertainment purposes only." Karen's economic warfare backfired spectacularly, turning local business owners against her HOA. But her dirtiest trick was the restraining order. Karen filed court papers claiming I'd stalked and threatened her, basing the entire complaint on me driving past the HOA entrance on the public road to reach my own property. The hearing was scheduled for the day before our county property hearing, clearly intended to get me arrested and force me to miss the crucial legal deadline. Karen's testimony was a masterpiece of creative fiction. She claimed to feel terrorized by normal ranch operations visible from her property. She described cattle sounds as aggressive animal noises designed to intimidate. She even claimed my workshop activities constituted weapons preparation by unstable veteran. The judge was skeptical but granted a temporary restraining order pending investigation. For 72 hours, I was legally prohibited from approaching HOA property, including the disputed entrance where our cattle normally crossed. Pure genius, actually. Karen had created a legal trap, either violate the restraining order or abandon normal ranch operations, both scenarios making me look like the problem. But here's where military training pays off. I hired professional cattle contractors to handle the movement, staying clear of the restricted area while documenting that cattle movement predates the subdivision by 70 years. County Animal Control observed the entire operation, verifying safe procedures and proper handling. The veterinarian provided written certification of animal health and welfare, everything documented, everything professional, everything legal. Karen's sabotage attempts escalated to physical harassment. HOA contractors accidentally damaged our fence during utility work. Anonymous individuals photographed ranch facilities at night, triggering motion sensor lights. Someone filed false animal cruelty complaints trying to get our livestock confiscated. Security cameras caught everything. Motion sensors recorded exact times. Digital evidence preserved in multiple locations, backed up off-site, chain of custody maintained like evidence in a criminal investigation. The most ridiculous incident involved Karen trying to get our ranch water supply condemned by the health department. She claimed agricultural runoff was contaminating groundwater, demanding immediate testing and possible closure. Health inspectors showed up with state-of-the-art testing equipment, took samples from our well, the creek, and surrounding properties. Results? Our water was cleaner than city municipal supply. The only contamination detected came from subdivision storm drains carrying lawn chemicals. Another Karen plan, another spectacular backfire. But the psychological pressure was real. Daily harassment, constant legal threats, community tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The smell of diesel exhaust from surveillance vehicles, mixed with the natural ranch scents, creating an atmosphere of siege. Mrs. Rodriguez organized neighborhood support, bringing coffee and solidarity during the worst of it. "Me hijo," she said, "bullies count on wearing you down, but we're not going anywhere." The breaking point came when Karen hired a private investigator to dig into my military service and personal finances. The PI violated privacy laws accessing protected records, giving us grounds for criminal charges against both him and Karen. But here's what Karen didn't understand about veterans. We've faced real enemies, real danger, real consequences. Her suburban psychological warfare was amateur hour compared to actual combat stress. 3 days before the county hearing, Karen made her final desperate move. She organized a community safety rally at the disputed entrance, inviting local media to witness her courageous stand against military extremism. Perfect. Let her dig the hole even deeper. The evening quiet felt different now. Not peaceful, but pregnant with approaching storm. Roosevelt sensed the tension, staying closer to the house, protective instincts alert. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. Karen's desperation reached nuclear levels with her emergency community safety meeting scheduled for the morning of our county hearing. She'd invited Channel 12 News, claiming to expose government cover-up of environmental hazards and veteran extremism. The setup was pure theater. HOA Community Center packed with suburban residents, concerned parent talking points printed on official letterhead, and Karen positioned at a podium like she was running for office. Our children's safety is being threatened by illegal agricultural operations and an unstable individual with military weapons training, she announced to the cameras. The edited Ring doorbell footage played on a big screen. Our gentle cattle transformed into menacing beasts through creative editing. But Karen's performance had a problem. Half her audience knew it was garbage. The reasonable HOA board members sat in the back, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with the extremist rhetoric. Meanwhile, Bradley was implementing his own escape plan. My financial sources revealed Whitfield Development had quietly filed bankruptcy, attempting to shield personal assets from the coming fraud investigation. He was preparing to throw Karen under the bus if the legal situation became untenable. The restraining order created Karen's perfect trap. With me legally prohibited from approaching HOA property, she scheduled the media event precisely when our cattle needed to cross near the disputed entrance for their normal pasture rotation. Her plan: claim the cattle movement violated the restraining order, demand my immediate arrest, and force me to miss the county hearing from jail. Brilliant strategy if you ignore the fact that I'd anticipated exactly this move. The professional cattle contractor I'd hired was a retired Marine named Jake Morrison, who understood precision operations under hostile conditions. Jake moved our cattle using a route that stayed precisely outside the restricted zone, GPS verified to the foot. But Karen wasn't satisfied with legal victories. She wanted dramatic confrontation for the cameras. Despite the restraining order, Karen drove her Mercedes to the boundary of the disputed area during the cattle movement. When Jake politely asked her to move her vehicle for safety reasons, she immediately called 911, claiming assault by military extremist associates. The arriving police officer was Tom Bradley, no relation to the developer, a veteran himself who'd known my family for years. One look at the scene, professional cattle handling, clearly marked boundaries, and Karen screaming about coordination between dangerous veterans, told him everything. "Ma'am," Officer Bradley said with Texas patience, "these gentlemen are conducting legal agricultural operations on private property. You're the one creating a disturbance." Karen's meltdown was spectacular. She demanded Tom arrest Jake for criminal conspiracy, accused me of using military connections to corrupt local police, and threatened to expose the conspiracy to federal authorities. All on camera, all recorded, all perfect evidence for tomorrow's hearing. The state environmental report arrived that afternoon like a gift from heaven. Comprehensive analysis confirmed our ranch operations were environmentally beneficial, while the subdivision's stormwater management violated multiple state regulations. The report recommended our ranch as a model for sustainable land use, while requiring the HOA to implement expensive upgrades to their drainage systems. But the final nail in Karen's coffin was her own social media activity. Screenshots revealed private messages where she admitted the harassment campaign was about protecting property values and removing undesirable elements. No mention of safety concerns or environmental protection, just economic discrimination and social prejudice. Mrs. Rodriguez's intelligence network had been busy too. HOA meeting minutes revealed Karen's real agenda: force ranch sale, enable Phase 2 subdivision development, increase HOA property values through community expansion. Everything documented, everything preserved, everything ready for court. The evening before the hearing, Karen made one last desperate play. She appeared on local news claiming government conspiracy to silence concerned citizens and protect military cronies. The interview was painful to watch. Karen interrupting questions, making wild accusations, and generally looking like someone who'd lost touch with reality. The reporter actually asked if she was feeling well. But my favorite moment came when the reporter asked about our family's 70-year history on the land. "That doesn't matter," Karen snapped. "Times change, communities evolve. We can't let sentiment interfere with progress." 70 years of Texas ranch heritage dismissed as sentiment, on camera, for broadcast throughout the county. If I'd scripted Karen's self-destruction, I couldn't have written it better. The night air carried familiar scents: hay, leather, and that clean smell of the creek running over limestone. Roosevelt stood at the fence line, massive and calm, like he understood that tomorrow would settle everything. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by with coffee and encouragement. Mijo, that woman's dug her own grave. Tomorrow, you just need to show up and let her bury herself. 12 hours until the county hearing. Karen had spent months setting the perfect trap for herself. The county courthouse meeting room was packed beyond fire code limits by 9 a.m. Local media, affected homeowners, ranch supporters, curious spectators, and a few folks who just loved watching train wrecks in real time. Karen arrived fashionably late in full business attire, radiating the confidence of someone who'd never lost a public argument. She'd brought backup, 3 HOA board members, her lawyer, and Bradley lurking in the back row like he didn't want to be associated with the proceedings. County Commissioner Sarah Walsh called for order, clearly nervous about the media attention. We're here to resolve a property boundary dispute between Stone Creek Ranch and Meadowbrook Estates HOA. This is a legal proceeding, not a public forum for personal grievances. Nolan McCarthy stood to present our case, every inch the experienced prosecutor. Commissioners, we're here because of a 70-year-old clerical error that's resulted in systematic harassment of a Texas ranch family. The documentary evidence was devastating. Original 1952 deed with mineral rights, continuous tax payments on disputed acreage, survey maps showing HOA built on ranch property. Every document professionally mounted, clearly labeled, impossible to dismiss. But the smoking gun was the 1987 county transfer record. The missing 25 acres that were never legally conveyed to Bradley's development company. The county sold what it didn't own, Nolan explained. The developer bought what couldn't be legally obtained. The HOA built facilities on land they never acquired. Karen's lawyer, sweating in his expensive suit, tried damage control. These are technical issues that can be resolved through proper legal channels. Our immediate concern is public safety and community welfare. Wrong approach in Texas, where property rights are sacred. Commissioner Walsh reviewed the original surveys with obvious concern. Mr. McCarthy, are you claiming the HOA is essentially squatting on private property? That's exactly what I'm claiming, Nolan replied. And we have evidence of systematic harassment attempting to force an illegal land acquisition. That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. Unable to stay silent while her position collapsed, she interrupted the proceedings. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, rising from her seat. "We're not going to let some backwards rancher destroy our community with his livestock operations and military intimidation." Commissioner Walsh gavelled for order. "Ma'am, you'll have your opportunity to speak." But Karen was beyond reason. These commissioners are obviously biased toward their military cronies. This whole proceeding is a sham to protect agricultural interests against legitimate residential development. The courtroom went dead silent. Accusing elected officials of corruption in a public hearing, that's political suicide in rural Texas. "Ma'am," Commissioner Walsh said with ice-cold calm, "you need to sit down immediately." Karen doubled down. "I demand federal investigation of this conspiracy. Local government, military connections, and agricultural lobbying, it's all connected." Security moved toward her, but Karen wasn't finished destroying herself. "We represent progress, modern communities, not some dusty ranch operation that belongs in a museum." That line, dismissing 70 years of Texas heritage as a museum piece, echoed through the packed room like blasphemy. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 3 generations on my shoulders. "Commissioners, my family has been good neighbors for 70 years. We've helped build this community, supported our neighbors, and operated according to every law and regulation. We're not going anywhere." Pause for effect, letting that sink in. "But we're also not going to be bullied off our own land by people who built illegally and then tried to cover their mistakes through harassment and intimidation." The room was completely quiet except for camera shutters clicking. "I'm offering a fair settlement that protects existing homeowner investments while acknowledging legal property rights. Ground lease agreement, clear titles for everyone, and an end to the harassment that's been tearing this community apart." Then came my mic drop moment. The choice is simple. Reasonable resolution that benefits everyone, or continued legal action that exposes systematic fraud and forces removal of all structures built on our property. Karen exploded. "You can't threaten this community. We won't be intimidated by some unstable veteran with delusions of importance." Commissioner Walsh had heard enough. "Security, please escort Mrs. Whitfield from the chambers." As they removed Karen, still screaming about conspiracies and military intimidation, the remaining HOA board members were frantically passing notes. Board member Jennifer Hayes stood up. "Commissioners, The Meadowbrook Community Association formally requests removal of Karen Whitfield from all leadership positions and authorization to negotiate reasonable settlement with Mr. Stone. The ruling was swift and decisive. The county found Stone Creek Ranch held clear title to the disputed 25 acres. All HOA liens against ranch property were declared void. The illegally formed HOA had 90 days to dissolve and reform under proper legal structure. Karen's harassment campaign had accomplished exactly the opposite of its intended goal: justice, Texas style. 6 months later, you wouldn't recognize Meadowbrook Estates. The new Meadowbrook Community Association dissolved within 30 days and reformed with Jennifer Hayes as president. Karen and Bradley quietly divorced and left town, him facing criminal fraud charges, her too embarrassed to show her face at the country club. The ground lease agreement we worked out became a model for rural-suburban cooperation. HOA residents got clear property titles, the community association paid fair compensation for land use, and ranch operations continued undisturbed. Property values actually increased because of the agricultural zoning stability. But the real transformation was social. Our first annual Harvest Festival drew 300 people: HOA families, longtime ranchers, and everyone in between. Mrs. Rodriguez organized the food trucks, Roosevelt got his own petting zoo section, and Channel 12 ran a feel-good feature about community healing through cooperation. The legal aftermath delivered its own justice. Bradley pleaded guilty to real estate fraud, receiving 3 years probation and hefty fines. The code enforcement officer was fired for conflict of interest violations. 3 other families recovered their stolen land through similar legal actions. Karen, last I heard, she was working retail in a strip mall outside San Antonio. Apparently, small-town politics weren't as easy to manipulate as pharmaceutical sales territories. The ranch itself underwent a renaissance. Settlement money funded workshop expansion, improved cattle facilities, and a conservation easement protecting the creek watershed forever. Sarah Schuyler, the veterinarian who stood by us during the harassment, accepted my marriage proposal last Christmas. The wedding's planned for next fall, with Roosevelt serving as honorary ring bearer. Here's what most people don't realize about property law battles. They're not really about land. They're about respect, community, and the right to exist without harassment. When someone tries to steal your heritage through legal intimidation, you're fighting for every family that's faced similar threats. The practical lessons were invaluable. I taught a workshop at the county extension office about property rights research. 43 people learned how to verify deed records, understand zoning classifications, and protect themselves from HOA overreach. Knowledge is the best defense against bureaucratic bullying. Environmental improvements exceeded everyone's expectations. Our creek restoration project created a model watershed that neighboring counties study for sustainable development practices. The conservation easement ensures clean water for generations while demonstrating that agriculture and environmental protection can coexist. But the most satisfying outcome was social. The Stone Creek Agricultural Scholarship sends 2 local kids to college annually, funded by lease payments from the Community Association. This year's recipients are studying agricultural engineering and environmental science, exactly the skills rural communities need. Mrs. Rodriguez, now honorary ranch grandmother, teaches traditional cooking classes in our new community kitchen. Her tamales have become legendary at local events, and she's training the next generation of neighborhood cooks. The broader impact rippled through rural Texas. Counties updated their title verification procedures. Real estate developers face stricter oversight. HOAs can't simply declare agricultural operations incompatible without legal standing. 3 ranch families approached me for legal consultation after facing similar harassment. Armed with our legal precedent and documentation strategies, they resolved their disputes quickly and favorably. Roosevelt, now 9 years old and still the king of his domain, has become something of a local celebrity. Tourists stop by to photograph the famous bull who stared down the HOA. He seems to enjoy the attention, posing patiently for selfies with visiting children. The workshop where this all started hosts monthly community meetings now. Former enemies work together on watershed protection, emergency preparedness, and supporting local agriculture. The smell of coffee and fresh hay has replaced the tension of legal battles. Looking back, Karen's harassment campaign accomplished something she never intended. It forced our community to confront the question of what we valued most. Property rights won, but so did cooperation, respect, and the understanding that rural and suburban neighbors can thrive together. Share your own HOA nightmare story in the comments. Let's support each other through these bureaucratic battles. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath stories where the little guy wins, and ring that bell for notifications. Next week's story involves a corrupt city council and a food truck entrepreneur who discovered the mayor's secret investment in her biggest competitor. Trust me, you won't believe how she exposed the conspiracy using nothing but health department records and social media detective work. Sometimes the good guys really do win.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.